All right, Emmanuel here, and I got questions now. I want to have a quick look at the effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on Kenya's economy, and just have a general overview of what some policy recommendations. Right now, the feature of the Russian invasion of Ukraine that makes it a very unique event in the modern day is the fact that the Russian state specifically, is actively and explicitly seeking for the erasure, right, of the Ukrainian state, right? This is completely against, say, the Westphalian order, right? That's one feature that makes it very different from other major conflicts of the last, let's say even just the last 2 decades, right? Major conflicts, at least conflicts involving superpowers, right? Now, what are the effects? So, a country like Kenya you're talking about a small economy with just about a 0.2% share of the global economy. So nothing that happens in Kenya is going to be felt across the world. I mean, not, you might have an event that reduces, I don't know, the supply of flowers to the Netherlands, or the number of athletes running in a competition. But, I mean, on the whole, right, it's a very small economy. Now, what does this mean? This means that on the one hand, what happens in Kenya doesn't have as great of an effect out there abroad, but what happens in to great segments of the global economy will have adverse effects on Kenya, right? And you're looking at a country that not only has a small share of the global economy, but whose the average income is very low. So it's also poor and a small country, right? So Russia invades Ukraine immediately. Very shortly afterwards, you have all these sanctions that are applied, and this is coming in a period when we still have many many global value and supply chain hiccups, right, related to the COVID period still in effect, right? Whether it's backlogs of supply, traffic in major ports, all these things are already happening when, say, allied or NATO and allied countries actually, and much of the world, right, imposes sanctions on Russian goods. One of the Russian goods that has important effects on global trade is petroleum, right? You put pressure on petroleum, and petroleum being a very fundamental commodity, the most traded good in the world, in terms of value, right? It contributes to global inflation, right? Now, this has effects on prices, right? On the consumer on the consumer price index. You're talking about the basket of goods that consumers generally consume, right, in Kenya. Now, given that, say, 50% of the average household income is spent on food, this means that price increases, even if they seem insignificant to some consumers around the world or even in Kenya, can be very, very significant for many, many households. Now, for example, during COVID, you had palm oil shortage, right? Because farmers in, say, I think in South Asia had left the farms. They weren't harvesting as much palm oil at the time. So then prices for palm oil rose. It's an important ingredient in food consumption, right? Then you also have fertilizer prices, an important input, right? So those two are just two of the many important effects that now for the palm oil, right? You put on top of that the effects of of petroleum. Significantly, it's petroleum and fertilizer that would have important effects for consumers, right? This is for events related to the invasion itself, right? This, discounting other global inflationary pressures. Now, the other problem you have is that food imports also begin to become more expensive, right? So on the whole, you're seeing that the average household is actually facing more and more challenges just meeting their consumption demand for food. In some countries around the world, this is worse than it is in others, right? If you're looking at Egypt, a major consumer of wheat, which is a major export of Russia, they have a bit of a slightly different picture, but still overall, food consumption adversely affected. We move on to the petroleum energy sector. We already made a few comments around there, but the bottom line is, look, Russia exports a lot of oil. A lot of their oil is sanctioned now on global trade. So what is the result of that? Well, other oil producing countries did not increase their production in order to counter veil these the cutoff in Russian oil supplies. So the effect of that is that oil prices rise. When we move into the manufacturing and construction sector, this is one sector that we might see very important effects, because in the years 2020 and 2021, Kenya actually imported a lot of steel products from both Russia and Ukraine, right? If you're on the ground in Kenya, you probably saw that Kenya had a very significant infrastructure outlay, right? We spent a lot on infrastructure. The Kenyan state spent a lot on infrastructure development in the last year. One of them being the Nairobi Expressway, probably the most significant. We're talking about a lot of steel imports to build that. Now, the effect is, if exports from Russia and Ukraine in general have been adversely affected, you might expect something to happen with steel imports to Kenya. I mean, furthermore, if you just have a look at iron ore futures actually rose following the invasion. So there could be very significant effects there, and we'll explore a bit more further in subsequent videos. Now, another issue here that pops up is gender justice, right? Now, there's always, how do we put this? Look, if Kenyans spend 50% of their income on food, and then many single-led households, right? Households with single parent households are actually being run by women, right? And say many of these are low income. So already low income households are adversely affected by food price inflation. Now, consider that the woman who works in an industry that's also affected by, say, the weather, perhaps she's selling products in the market, and then consider where government help goes. Like, let's say fertilizer, for example. When you subsidize fertilizer, you're not helping this woman-led single household, single parent household, right? You're helping a wealthy farmer, for example, right? And this is not assuming any kind of a malevolence on anyone's part, but that's the effect, right? You subsidize this farmer, and there's an opportunity cost, because every dollar you spend trying to subsidize fertilizer for a wealthy farmer, is a dollar you don't spend, or a shilling, or an outlay that you don't spend on helping this woman, right, and her household. Consider again packaged food subsidies, right? So if your state introduces a subsidy for packaged food like wheat or other grains that are packaged, right? What is the effect of that? You're effectively helping urbanites, right? People in urban areas. Now, what about the single mothers households outside of urban areas who don't consume, or households that don't consume packaged food? So again, your help is going in one direction. There's an opportunity cost of that. And then finally, consider motor vehicle subsidies, right? Subsidies for petroleum products, right? When you're subsidizing those who drive, you're subsidizing a minority in Kenya, because it's a minority group of people who drive, right? Minority in the demographic, in terms of the share of the total, right? So overall, these are just some of the important effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? As life gets more difficult for many households who are already on the low income end of the income spectrum, and then on top of that, some of the help that the state is giving isn't going to the neediest households. And this also raises the issue of being very circumspect about budget and running budget deficits, because the day comes when it rains and you need that budget umbrella and you just don't have it.